So it looks like we've got about 25, 30 folks on the call, and other folks might trickle in over the first couple minutes here. But because we've got a good group and these first couple of minutes are going to be introductions, I'll kind of get things kicked off and let folks know what we're doing today. And as folks come in late, we'll hopefully in a minute and a half, we'll already be on the good stuff of talking with our nominee for House District, Maddie Eden, and Mayor Annise Parker. But I'm Sam Spatelnik. You can hear from me real quick at the beginning and just on the facilitation side. I work at CampaignOS, where Maddie is our CTO and founder. And I'll just be doing a little bit of facilitating on kind of our topics as we talk about prioritizing during a changing political climate. We had already set this up to talk about like starting on this webinar before COVID hit, to talk about new ways to think about organizing your team just based on new digital tools that were out there. But of course, we're going to pivot a lot of the conversation to help what folks are dealing with today, given the current crisis. So I'll briefly kind of introduce everybody for those that don't know everyone here. Talk a little bit about some of the mechanics of how you can interact with the webinar and send us questions throughout. And then we're going to go through 4 main topics about targeting voters, reaching out to voters, tracking your success on that front, and how to think about the future insofar as we can predict it. And hopefully we have got some time for Q&A at the end. So I mentioned who I am. I'm going to pass it over to Annise Parker to kind of introduce herself for anyone that isn't familiar, both in terms of her personal background and Victory Fund. Mayor Parker, you're muted.
Can't tell you how many times I've done that on webinars recently. As you can tell from the screen, I am the president and CEO of the LGBTQ Victory Fund and Victory Institute, and also the former mayor of the city of Houston. I've actually been on the ballot 11 times in Houston, including being elected 3 times as mayor of the city of Houston. In my role at Victory Fund, I work with LGBTQ candidates across the country. We do training and endorsement of candidates, and this is one aspect of what we're trying to do as we move into the future, finding new ways to connect with candidates and to help more people access the political process. Looking forward to the conversation.
And I guess I'll just jump right in here. I am Madeline Eden. I am the Democratic nominee for the Texas State House running in District 17. I am the CTO and co-founder of Civitech and the registertovote.org fund. I founded Civitech to build CampaignOS, primarily to facilitate down ballot candidates as a focus primarily, and also to effectively help more candidates engage and run for office, and also get better representation elected across the board.
And I already mentioned who I am, working for Maddie, and working, if anything, if anyone wants to learn more about our work after this, we may be talking more one-on-one, but that's another conversation for another time. For this webinar, we're going to be going through several topics. Feel free to hit that Q&A button on the bubbles, and that's going to, or on the bottom of your screen, like you can see on the screenshot here, and that's going to pop up on my screen, so that if there's anything on topic, I can make sure that we address it in the middle of the conversation, later in the conversation, or at the end. And if we miss any of them, that way we can catalog other questions you had to follow up in writing afterwards. What we're going to do to kick things off right now is I want to launch a quick poll. We just want to get a sense of the 30 or 40 people on this call. Is it mostly candidates themselves, campaign managers, or other various staffers, just to help us kind of frame, figure out the most appropriate framing around this conversation. So I'll give this 30 seconds, then we'll end the poll so that both Maddie and Mayor Parker can see it and keep it in mind as we go through these questions.
Yeah, I should probably add that I am a Victory Fund endorsed candidate. running in Texas. So.
Well, and I know there are folks on the call who may or may not be applying to Victory Fund for support, but we are interested in tracking the success of LGBTQ candidates wherever they may be running and whether or not they are endorsed by the organization. And if you want a moment of inspiration, go to do a web search, outforamerica.org. You can see our map that we maintain of every sitting LGBT elected official in the United States that we know of. There are more than 850.
So I just ended the poll. It looks like of the folks that had a chance to click it, about 80%. So more than half were candidates themselves, and another 20% are campaign managers running the big picture. So that helps us know to kind of keep this big picture and with a candidate focus in mind in particular. Oh, I can share that so everybody can see it.
Got it.
Great. So now we're going to jump in. You're going to hear a lot less from me for the rest of this. And for those watching, since the screen is just kind of a big picture topic on what we're talking about, there should be a button for you to click and flip it so you're mainly looking at the panelists talking to each other and have this in the corner as opposed to the other way around. But to kick things off, especially for Mayor Parker, who's been on the ballot as many times as you have, what is a win number, and what should I consider when calculating it? Especially, how should I be thinking about my win number changing under the current environment?
So first, if you're on this call, you should already know what your win number is. And I don't say that to be rude or insulting, but if you don't know what your win number is, you need to start really scrambling. And it's very simple. How many people do you expect to turn out to vote? And considering how many people are in your race, how many have to vote for you in order to win outright or throw you into a runoff? Fairly straightforward. But calculating a win number right now is difficult. Traditionally, what we do is we look at other races, past races in that same district, whether you're running in a presidential year or the non-presidential year, because there's peaks and valleys, and then sort of make a ballpark guess, add a little fudge factor on top of that so you're not cutting it too close, and then trying to hit that target. The challenge right now is that, excuse me, seasonal allergies, that cough there. The challenge right now is that many of the primaries are delayed. Even those primaries that are going to be happening, they're undergoing analysis as to whether there are going to be changes in location, changes in process. That may impact turnout in ways that can't be analyzed right now. As a candidate, I wanted to control every variable I could. This election is going to be a whole lot more unknowns than usual. With mail-in ballots, for example, a lot of states are scrambling to do mail-in ballots. That could boost turnout. Generally good for Democratic candidates, but we don't know that, and it's also a matter of how it was handled. Witness Wisconsin earlier this week. The other aspect of win numbers, and I know Maddie's going to jump in on this next, is that your win number is generally calculated on who has showed up to vote in the past. Well, that's a variable you can change. How do you do that?
You got to turn out more voters, right? And target the right voters. I think this year is totally unpredictable in those terms, right? I think your calculation of your win number right now is going to be highly specific upon where you are, how the pandemic is impacting the population around you, what the ballot by mail laws are like in your state, and how easily you can interface with your voters right now. Once you consider all of those factors at once, to what Mayor Parker said a moment ago, it is going to be entirely unpredictable this year. There's going to be so much ambiguity in the field, just with the lack of field, that planning your win number is going to be difficult. Personally, I've always thought like that. When you're calculating your win number, you want to go back and you want to look at a similar year, right? So a presidential year would be 2016 would be the ideal one to target, right? And a lot of folks previously thought that turnout in 2020 was going to, completely dwarf the 2016 turnout, or even 2012 or 2008 turnout with Obama. So, but I'm curious. I also have the seasonal allergies. I like to play this game called "Is it allergies or is it coronavirus?" So, yeah, I'm curious to know though, Mayor Parker, if you what your thoughts are on estimating your win number at too high a count. If you think that's has a negative impact on calculations, or if you can ever estimate too high, right?
Well, you can estimate unrealistically or too high, but it's better, I think, to overshoot it than to undershoot it. In general, I've won 9 races. I've lost 2 races, but I have a lot of friends in politics, and the consensus is that if you get blown out, you get blown out. But if you lose by 12 votes, you want to go shoot yourself. Right. And you don't want to lose by 12 votes. So but how do you calculate a win number, and how do you expand your pool? If we know how to calculate a win number. You look at as we both just said, you look at what's happened in the past. But let's talk about expanding that pool when you can't do the traditional knock on doors and find people. There are tools that allow you to see who's registered, who's not registered. Do you have enough volunteers? Used to be on the doors, now on phone, working their friend network. Do you have enough volunteers to help push out an active voter registration drive in the midst of the pandemic? And if you do, are there tools available to do that? And of course, the answer is yes.
Absolutely.
Talking to you, Maddie.
Yeah, well, I mean, we definitely have those tools that I think, in terms of when you're calculating your win number and determining whether or not it's really the big question for a lot of folks is whether or not it's a partisan race, right? And if it is a partisan race, then you definitely want to establish what your voting age population is. Once you get your voting age population and you look at the previous turnout for a similar year, then you want to basically grab 51% of the vote. And if there are not enough folks that fall within the partisan scale of the side of the race where you're running, say Democratic, then you want to work to expand the number of voters that are out there in your pool, right? Whether that's through persuasion or voter expansion, which I think kind of jumps into the next question there that Sam just brought up on the screen. And voter expansion, one of the biggest ways to expand your voting population in your area is voter registration. When Mayor Parker was talking about the tools, for that, there are many tools out there that, like this one here, Map the Vote, is one that we've built and released through a nonprofit organization called Register to Vote. And it is a free to use distributed canvassing tool that basically displays every unregistered voter that we are able to track in the continental United States. Well, not just continental, all the United States. And so I don't even know what city that is there in that screenshot, but there are. Yeah,
Muskegon, Michigan.
Michigan, yes. Well, it's a similar view for pretty much any state or city when you look at this tool. There are unregistered voters everywhere, and the key is, when you need to expand your voting population, whether even for nonpartisan races, doesn't matter. When you need to expand and bring in more voters, this is a really good way to do it.
So I've got a question there, Maddie. What type of races are going to be the most important to kind of think about that? Because not every race is equal. So what are the things that I would look at my race and say, if these things are true, voter expansion is especially important for me?
So
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in front of that and say it. If you can calculate your win number with the voters that you have, you're not going to be spending a lot of time on voter expansion. You're going to be working on persuading the voters that you need to show up at the polls to get there. So,
absolutely.
Back to Maddie.
Well, and I will add an addendum to that. Unless you're running in, say, a primary, right, and you're running against another, like a Democrat, and so a friend of mine this year ran in her primary, and she made voter expansion a really big piece of her primary election, and she literally killed it, blew out her opponent 70-30, down here near Travis County in Texas, and she did massive voter registration drives, and one of the things about registering voters all over the country is that when you register them, they're a lot more likely to turn out for an election. And it's also, it is easily one of the best ways to do direct voter contact on new voters. You engage with them, you get them, excited about voting, and they're ready to turn out, right? So,
and they're linked to your campaign.
Yes, yeah, and so with a tool like Map the Vote, it's great for field and for working. A lot of folks actually use this tool now, and they basically lay it out with Nextdoor, and they do like virtual door knocking. But yeah, I would say right now probably best to maintain social distance and not knock on doors. But if you want to look up your neighbors, this is a great tool for it, and can help you expand your voting population. There are a ton of voter registration tools out there that also help with that. Registertovote.org. There are services like the one we provide, where we can make available to you all of the unregistered voters that are in your district, especially ones of a specific partisan lean, or a specific ideology. So, but when you're talking about like the ideal sort of race where you would want to target this, would be one where, when you look at the statistics for your district, if you're a Democrat and you're running against an incumbent Republican, and you're in a Republican district and you have 40% Democratic voters and 60% Republican voters, it's like, how many unregistered Democratic voters are there that you could draw on from that pool in order to make your race more competitive? And specifically in my district, that's what I've been doing for the last year, is trying to expand the voting population under, of my pool of voters by doing consistent voter registration. And so, yeah, that's easily in states like Texas, where voter suppression is huge. Voter expansion is a really good way to win your race. We had a lot of luck with it in 2018 and flipped a lot of state house seats here using very targeted methods. And I think, it's all highly state dependent. I think everybody, has the capability, though, to use that as a tool in their political toolbox for getting both voters turned out and engaged. So.
Maddie, you mentioned that. Oh, go ahead, Mayor Parker. Sorry.
No, I saw pop up on the chat someone who's saying that they are in a state without mandatory voter registration. So if you do same-day registration, it's a completely different ballgame. This is really, this part of the discussion, voter expansion in terms of registering voters is not the only type of voter expansion. The other is to ID your supporters and then have a GOTV or Get Out the Vote turnout program, which we can talk about later.
Absolutely. I did want to say, though, this tool, Map the Vote, specifically in states with same day or same day voter registration or non-mandatory or automatic voter registration. This is an interesting tool because in a lot of states where this tool here specifically in states like that expands your target your target universe exponentially, because it does take time for folks to get registered when they move to a new state, even in states with automatic voter registration, right? And so there you have a lot of voters out there that don't realize they can just walk up to the polls on the same day and register while right there. And so if you've got a map with a bunch of folks who aren't registered, even in a state with automatic voter registration, this is this adds more doors to your GOTV initiative and allows you to the opportunity to turn out a lot more folks as well. So,
I'm on section 2 of this. We're going to get even more into some of those outreach methods, both for that and to Mayor Parker's point about to folks that are registered, but how this changes that turnout universe. Before we continue on that, I want to put this up front. Mayor Parker, you had some great things to say when we kind of prepared for this webinar day before yesterday. There's a lot of people afraid about fundraising. How do I ask? Do I ask at all under the COVID crisis? What are both of your thoughts on how you would be approaching fundraising right now, especially under COVID?
So you can't stop fundraising just because of COVID. The campaign costs are still there. If you want to win and you know what your win number is now, you still have to reach those voters. You have to, whether, but previously it might have been going door to door, dropping lit. Now you're doing digital advertising, or you're using one of the electronic methods of contacting people. Still costs money. You have to do the traditional things. Call time. I was looking for another word. Call time just sucks. It's horrible. Running for mayor of Houston, I raised more than $4 million 3 times in 6 years. It's a lot of call time. Call time still has to happen. And folks are at home. They're answering calls that they might not have otherwise. It's actually in some ways easier to find people. You don't know everyone's personal situation. You don't know whether they've they're doing fine or whether they've just been laid off. You still have to do it. What you may need differently, though, is to figure out what I would call a new handshake, because everybody has a way to start that fundraising conversation. And always best to be straight up front. Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm a candidate for. And a lot of the constituents in my area are dealing with challenges of social distancing. How have you been holding up? How's your family? Whatever you're comfortable with starting, but you still have to make the ask. And no different from regular pre-COVID-19 call time, there are a lot of people who turn you down. The goal is not to just ask for dollars. Your ultimate goal is to make a connection. You ask for dollars. Hey, I just got laid off. I don't have any money to give you. Well, I would still love to have your vote, and I'd still love to have your support. If you have some extra time, can I recruit you to my volunteer team? Man, I don't have any time. I'm scrambling. I'm trying to, find ways to make money. I still want your vote. Can I list you as a supporter? Whatever, keep going down the list. I'd like to put a yard sign in front of your house. Can I just come and drop a yard sign? You have your list of asks, and you just keep working down that list until you get a yes on something, or you figure out that this person is gone for good. But that aspect of it doesn't change.
So that leads really nicely into some of the next section. So I'll just kind of move us on there, because you're already talking about it. You're already mentioning some of these additional strategies now that I can't knock doors. What I also want to weave into that, and this is still kind of thinking about targeting as well, are there people that maybe were low priority before because I kind of assumed I was going to get their vote pre-COVID, that maybe I need to start reaching out to in COVID because maybe I have to work harder to get them to remember to vote in a crisis? Who are those people? What does that outreach look like, as well as any other outreach methods you might be trying that aren't traditional?
Maddie, what do you think?
I mean, I think that right now, in general, you know, I think there are a lot of people who are going to be scared to turn out to the polls soon. You know, as we progress, I think we saw that in Wisconsin. And I think we're going to see that, you know, across the country moving forward. I think we'll see that in July when we're doing runoffs here in Texas. I think, and I think that, you know, folks that we need to target for turnout, like we need to do it strategically, and we need to do it, you know, with long-term consideration to what things are going to look like in another 3 or 4 months, especially in terms of, you know, your high propensity, your high propensity turnout voters, like your seniors, folks who would typically, you know, who are eligible for things like vote by mail, but don't necessarily usually turn out to vote by mail, right? Like I know for a fact in Texas, there were over 500,000 seniors that turned out to vote in person in the primaries this year, who could have voted by mail. And I think, you know, I think who you're targeting and how you're targeting them right now, it does change a bit. But I think there are a lot of opportunities that come with that as well, right? Especially if you're strategic about it, so.
You need to be doing things online, virtual house parties, virtual fundraisers. It's a great time to showcase your own leadership. Put your volunteer base to work. They may not all be coming into a campaign headquarters and getting dispatched on doors, but each one can do work from their own home. Your key volunteers need to be working to recruit new volunteers. Create a round of wellness checks for ID'd senior voters in your area. Put, you know, regardless of partisan lean, show your leadership, show how you would govern once you were elected. I did a lot of fundraising in my early years with house party fundraising. I actually did a lot of fundraising with house parties the whole time. And the reason I did house parties is if you do a big fundraiser, you can raise a lot of money at once, but people think they don't have to show up because someone else will be there. In a house party, people, there's social pressure to show up. House parties work virtually just as they do in person, but you may have to teach people the infrastructure of how to do a virtual house party. Do a virtual town hall where you take questions from folks who are sitting at home interested in the election.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've seen, there have been a lot of folks who have been doing those specific, you know, virtual town halls, virtual roundtables. I've been doing one with my campaign, texting, like Mayor Parker said, wellness checks, right? Several campaigns have had really good success with phone banking and text banking and just checking in on folks, right? This is like Mayor Parker said, this is an opportunity to step up and show like that you are a leader in your community, right? That you are capable of supporting folks regardless of, you know, where they stand on a partisan basis, and you know, step up. You're going to be representing all of these people regardless, and so, you know, online is huge, and you know, phone calls and but definitely, what was the other one? The baking that a lot of folks are doing. You know, I think, you know, and taking the opportunity to you know, show people how you are engaging with the community right now and supporting the community and supporting people, right? And just to reiterate what Annise just said, volunteers are a lot more apt to sign up right now. You know, especially if you are doing something that really lends itself well to supporting the community right now, because there's so many areas where folks can help, right? It's an all hands on deck kind of thing. And so, yeah, I think there's, you know, while your typical campaign activities, you know, aren't really optional anymore. I mean, there are still a lot of other opportunities to make up ground. So
drop off a stack of campaign postcards for each of your volunteers to send to write a personal note, send to their friends. You know, they're sitting at home, give them something to do that is productive for both them and for the campaign.
absolutely.
Being a resource, again, showing how you would lead when you're in office and being a resource and putting neutral information out. I have no problem with punching my opponents, but this is not necessarily the best time to do that. If you can also differentiate yourself, particularly in a primary, by engaging regularly and providing good contacts and good information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
I'm going to jump to this next section, and then we're going to loop back at the end to kind of open preparing for unknown future, which is a lot of what we're starting to get to. But I do want to kind of pivot here to really lean in. I know some folks have wrote in questions about some of the software, and this is really a moment just for Maddie to speak to both CampaignOS specifically, and I'm going to pull up the software live, but mainly whether you use our software or not as a visual tool to help her talk about, and to help both her and Mayor Parker talk about what metrics would you be tracking week to week in your campaign right now, and what's the benefit of trying to unify that? What's the benefit of trying to have your campaign metrics all in one place and not in silos? So Maddie, go ahead and you can go ahead and speak to that while I start shuffling the screen share here.
Sure. Although, you know, like, yeah, Mayor Parker is also just a wealth of knowledge on this, in this as well. Yeah, and this is well, this is our progress map, or I think an image of our progress map, which effectively, you know, this is a unified tracking system. And so, I guess to answer Sam's question, the key metrics you want to be tracking right now: positive IDs. You know, how many volunteer shifts you're running, you know, what the contact rates are, you know, success rates, of course, fundraising as well, the types of positive IDs that you're engaging, you know, and the voters that you're engaging right now. You can track these things digitally just as easily as you can track them from the field. And if you're using the right tools, then you're able to, you know, track them efficiently without having to do a lot of work. Speaking to why unifying an interface is the right thing is because nobody likes to build that spreadsheet and then update it every day from all the different sources of data, you know, whether it be your call time statistics and text banking, phone banking, you know, all of the different tools that are basically dropping data in. You can either build a system yourself, or you can find something that will unify those and give you a common reporting interface. This is my friend Julie Oliver's district right here. And this is yeah, her progress to goal map that she uses. I don't know if this one was configured. No, this is configured for her general election, but so like our tool here tracks all of the registration initiatives, gets us registration targets. It also helps us to track a win number and calculate a win number. And once we calculate that win number, it breaks everything down into bite-sized chunks of like how we're supposed to target where our priorities are on a precinct by precinct or county by county level. And then it also ties in on the back end to tools like VAN on it, you know, NGP VAN and other like systems like Hustle or Get Through in order to basically track positive IDs using those systems and pull them in, and then determines based off of each individual voter's data, which one of these pools that voter falls into. And as you can see it like up here there's a positive ID bar, and that's kind of like the unified total number. And then it tracks, existing base voters that are going to turn out anyway. And then the rest of it is effectively targets that you're going to want to hit in each of your districts. So this is my district here that Sam jumped over to, and yes, on the priority side. But this tool is handy because, if I don't have a data team for my campaign, right? And I am effectively the data team for my campaign, and I don't have a lot of time to go and correlate this data and compile it every day and pull reports out of Van and pull reports out of tools. And so this does all that for me in one interface. And and I know exactly which precincts I need to do more work in, where I need to focus my labor, and where I need to focus my volunteers and my advertising, all of my efforts. So I don't know if that's, if there's,
yeah, I think the last question I would ask to both of you there is, if you have unified information, data, top line data about your campaign at a moment's notice anytime you want it, instead of having to have people pull reports for it, what type of better strategic decisions does that equip you to make, as opposed to if you didn't have those tools, especially if you don't have a data team?
Well, it tells you whether you're hitting your targets in different areas. I'm looking at the district on screen, and I'm assuming that each population center there's a and you can see on each population center there's a targeted number of voters that you're going to need, and how many of them have you identified. It shows you where you need to redirect your volunteer resources in real time. You can do this. You don't have to have it. You don't have to have technology. You can do this.
Oh, yeah.
And any good campaign is tracking this. But yeah, it's great to have it all integrated and doing it automatically as you identify voters. But you have to be identifying the voters. You have to be doing the voter contact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll pivot to what futures to prepare for in a second, but I really like this one question we have back on the social media when Mayor Parker, you were talking, both of you were talking about showing what type of leader you would be. Ravi Grivoy Shah asked, he's a family physician on the front lines. Sorry if I guessed a pronoun, I hope I got that right. But how should they be taking advantage of showing off the type of outreach they're having without overplaying it?
You use the credentials you have, absolutely, and do it in a way you don't have to talk about your opponent. You don't have to talk about the idiot in the White House. You can talk about, and victory is bipartisan. I'll just say that. However, the idiot in the White House. But you can talk about good, clear, neutral advice. You can put out links to local resources, the food banks, food distribution sites, testing sites, best information, best practices, and do it so that people get, if you do it routinely, people will get used to turning to you as an expert. And as a physician, you can use that credential, but even as someone who's not credentialed in that way, if folks begin to turn to you because they trust the fact that you're not pushing a Democratic message or a Republican message, you are pushing good information, you're building a rapport and you're building connections.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as a physician, I think everyone is looking to you right now. So I think it does give you a really big opportunity to capitalize on that fact for your race without even having to politicize it or trying too hard to capitalize it, right? If you're just doing your job and you're being visible and present and and you're making yourself available as an information resource and as a resource in general, then I think that right there that there is going to cover a lot of ground for you.
So, Maddie, you and I have talked before about there is a difference between being political and politicizing something. Being politically savvy is taking advantage of every advantage you have. Politicizing something is very different, and this is about winning and using the tools that put you in the best position to win and put you in a good light, frankly, which is different from using the situation in a way that either attacks your opponent or builds on people's fears.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have just talked about it, and I think, you know, now more than ever, like there's no need to push identity politics, right? Like, I think every candidate's biggest opportunity this year is again, we can't speak enough to it, is to step up and lead where you are now, right? So, and by doing that and being nonpartisan about it, you don't have to you don't have to reference your opponent, right? I mean, this is an opportunity for you to be political and be a leader, but not necessarily, you know, make it a politically charged sort of endeavor, right? So
to expand that same topic outside of things I might do over the next few weeks, you mentioned a lot of the unknowns that are already out there about which states are going to go to vote by mail, what dates are going to change in terms of different election dates and election methods. Really looking at all the way between now and 7 months from now in November, what are the big picture things you'd be thinking about or trying to control, given how much things are changing around us?
I would say it's all about building, whether 2 years ago how you would have campaigned or today how you would campaign, it's all about focusing on what variables you can control through your campaign. And the number one variable you can control is how you go about building the relationship with the people that you want to vote for you. Finding them, identifying them, connecting to them, reconnecting to them, and making sure that you build a relationship between now and November. You know, all of the other things you have to be aware of, but that's not something you can control. So what you can control is the efforts that you put into the campaign. The disciplined fundraising, the regular and routine voter contact, the very careful voter ID and creating the metrics so that you can track how you're doing towards your win number. All of those things have to happen.
yeah, I mean, and just, you know, you got to roll with it right now, right? There's too much out there you can't control. Yeah, I can't even speak enough to that. Everything is changing so fast right now that there's hardly any keeping up. So I think the one big benefit is that it's that way for everyone right now, right? It's not just one person in particular. Isn't it? You know, your opponent is going to be dealing with just as much ambiguity as you are, and if they're an incumbent, they're probably dealing with a hell of a lot more of it. So yeah, it's thrive in stress or don't, I guess. Would be the yeah.
Well, I really feel like we've covered these last two prompts just in the organic conversation about ways to continue building a coalition and community without that face-to-face contact. And then I guess, Maddie, is there anything that you would add about CampaignOS in particular, addressing the current COVID challenges before we just open up for really encourage people to lean in with any questions that we haven't addressed so far?
I mean, you know, we built these tools specifically to help down ballot candidates, and a lot of our stuff is heavily digitally focused. So, you know, it does provide certain opportunities right now, more so. I mean, we had great field tools as well, but right now the digital stuff is going to rule. And so, you know, definitely if you have the opportunity, check out the tools that we built. There's a lot of stuff that we have out there that, you know, we provide free of charge, that you know, candidates and organizations can use. So
Well, we'll have a poll later for anyone that does want to learn more about us. So now I encourage anyone that to jump in to the open questions, and I'll kind of grab some to either speak about or to make sure we circle back and get written responses to you later. So this one's to ask about talking about voter outreach through phone calls, text messages, Facebook messages, and other venues, specifically even thinking about cost, method, and logistics. So really just asking for a deeper tactical exploration of what your outreach could look like right now.
So it depends on what your win number is and what your constituent populations are. Who are your voters? If I'm over 60, I no longer, I mean, I finally just cut the cord on my home phone this last year. But for, you know, older voters, it's the telephone. I'm not on Facebook. I actually have a Facebook page, but it's not me, just telling you. You know, so who's your target population? And depending on your target population, that depends on the message, that determines the message you need to use to reach them. That's why we've both emphasized that it's not just about electronic campaigning and virtual campaigning and everybody gets on Facebook and does a bunch of Facebook Live things. That's why postcards still work. That's why phone calls still matter. Text messages, every tool you have that's available out there, it has to be customized to who your target audience is.
Yeah. And
then you budget accordingly.
Definitely, and you know, sit there and perform analysis on that as well as like where you're having the most success, right? And in terms of, you know, and I just to probably beat a dead horse, you know, now is a really good time to rely a lot on your volunteers to help you spread that outreach, especially the organic stuff through Facebook and text messaging and phone banking, right? This is because not only do you have a lot of folks who are sitting at home who are, you know, confused, concerned, and probably feeling isolated, you have, you know, that, and plus, you know, the individuals that want to do something about that. So, you know, you can really harness that and turn out a volunteer initiative in a really big way right now. So
I hope I understand this question.
And when I started phone banking back in the dark ages, you all had to be in the same room together with multi-line phones. Now it's all dispersed, and every one of your volunteers can be in a different place, and they can be looking at the same data and calling through lists without having to step on each other or overlap. And so it's actually really seamless and easy to do.
Absolutely, and not even that expensive, right? I mean, predictive dialing and depending on your state, a lot of that stuff is really makes calling a lot more efficient.
I hope I'm interpreting this question from Brandy Jude right correctly, because it looks like we just want to, that Brandy is looking to expand on where a lot of the tactical conversation has been about the next couple months where we're capacity building and getting positive IDs. Looks like Brandy's looking for specifically GOTV and how that might be different under if we're still not be able to go face-to-face like usual.
There's no one size fits all. That's a great question. And again, every campaign is different depending on what the state rules are going to be. If your state is going to shift to an all mail ballot process, for example, then you've got to pivot your campaign to making sure that every one of your positive ID voters has requested a mail ballot. It's a little bit different conversation than if people are still going to have to show up in person, and then every one of your positive IDs is getting a phone call from your campaign saying, have you voted yet? You know, it's either, have you requested the mail ballot? Have you received the mail ballot? Have you turned the mail ballot in? Or it's, have you voted? Have you voted? Have you voted? And oh, by the way, once you voted, you get off my list and I stop calling you.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it, actually. And yeah, the GOTV part, you know, the calling is good, texting is good, and that's why, you know, just gonna harp on it again. Right now, when you're doing this outreach, you know, now is the time to do outreach. You're going to get a lot more responses, and you're going to basically be able to link those people to good phone numbers, to good email addresses, to good, you're going to basically have known good contact points for all of these folks, and you'll be able to turn them out to vote come election time. And that's, another important piece of it.
You have a relationship.
Yeah.
That ties really nicely to this last question that we'll do, and then we'll do a final poll and wrap up, which is about you, Maddie. You mentioned tying names to phone numbers. What are some creative things that we can do to identify people that we don't have an accurate phone number for, besides just sending them postcards?
Well, I mean, you can track down unregistered voter data if you can find it. It is a good one. The other ways to do it, I mean, there are email is good. Social media is good. Believe it or not, it's actually really easy to go on social media and find somebody that's supportive of you, and then find out who they are in the voter file. And there are even some tools out there that can help with that. I don't know. In terms of, I'm thinking probably Mayor Parker's got another idea on this one as well, but.
It's been every campaign, you have to figure out, do your research as to the tools that are out there. I mean, if you are a victory endorsed candidate through our candidate portal, we regularly update lists of voter contact tools and information, different, both great services like CampaignOS that are available for free and others that cost, but there are lots of different ways to find your voters. You have to determine which ones you're most comfortable with, maybe which ones are most specific to your area. There's lots of different ways to do it. And again, not one size fits all. And I think we should say that this webinar is intended to be a broad, high-level conversation. It's not a substitute for a full-scale candidate campaign training. Victory does candidate and campaign trainings. They're not solely for our endorsed candidates. They are solely for LGBTQ candidates, but they are not necessarily restricted in any way to our Victory candidates. And I hope you go to the victoryinstitute.org and look for our candidate campaign training information. It's usually in person. We do a 3.5-day training several times a year. We're doing our first virtual one, so we're having to learn and adapt just as you as candidates are. But this is designed to just say, you're not alone. This is, it's happening to candidates all over the country. We're all scrambling. There's certain things that you can do to make sure that you're on the path to success, and I appreciate you being on.
Yeah, I just want to plug Victory Institute as well. As somebody who's attended the training, incredibly useful, especially for LGBTQ candidates. So yeah, cannot recommend it enough.
I'm going to trigger this final quick poll of just for folks that do want to follow up with us with CampaignOS. I don't know if we tested this, so if you respond yes to this, I'm hoping it's going to send us a feedback form of which email addresses said yes to this. I realize now we didn't test that, and there's a chance I'm just going to know how many out of the 40 of you did it. And so heads up, as a backstop for an email asking you to identify yourself. And if we do have that technical issue, I apologize in advance to the folks that say no on that email, because that's exactly what we're trying to avoid on this. So hopefully that works. I'll add anecdotally that with the handful of campaigns, and this is not about our software, but the handful of campaigns that we've been working with on that last question, we have seen a lot of success of people handing lists of target voters to volunteers and giving them the name and like age and gender and city that we have in van to your voters if we don't have a phone number, and saying, hey, you get just only spend 2 minutes per voter, go plug in their name and see if it looks like there's a 26-year-old female that lives in Oklahoma in on Facebook that matches that, and save that and send us a list of those. because you should pretty quick be able to see if they look like they're about the right age and in the right city, to match, kind of manually match that Facebook identity to the voter file. And we found that to be surprisingly time effective. That's the one thing that I've seen in the campaigns we work with. And then I'll open it back up to Maddie and Annise to kind of add any final thoughts here.
Yeah, I wish I had some final thoughts to add. Just want everybody to stay safe out there, you know. But to that point, I think, you know, right now there are a lot of, I've heard firsthand, you know, that a lot of candidates are kind of, you know, some are even giving up, and a lot of them are really, you know, discouraged. So I think, you know, now is definitely not the time for that, right? I think that every race that you know, a candidate is running is still a competitive race, right? Especially if you're an LGBTQ candidate, we need more LGBTQ representation, just, you know, to have equitable representation in our country right now. So, you know, don't give up and continue, you know. I don't know.
So if to anyone who was, I think, came on a little bit late, you know, Victory Fund and Victory Institute, we only work with LGBTQ candidates. We want to know who's out there, who's running. We want to be able to track your campaign and your success. We are, Victory Fund's an endorsing organization, and of the more than 750 out LGBT candidates we've identified, we hope to endorse as many as 300 of you during this election cycle, but we want to make sure that all of you have the best chance of winning as you possibly can. So visit victoryfund.org, victoryinstitute.org, and if you want some more training, check us out at victoryinstitute.org, candidate campaign training. Thank you.